All right, everyone. Kia ora tātou, and namihi nui for joining us this evening. My name is Natalia Larson, and I am Waiheke Waterways Project Coordinator at the Waiheke Resources Trust. While we wait for the other participants to arrive, please introduce yourselves. I see that two of you already have. So Naumai Haramai, and where you're joining us from in the chat box. We will use this feature during our webinar to keep track of your questions and comments. And I would like to start our workshop with a karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamu te moana, he huarahi ma tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa, huie tai kie. And the English translation to that is, may peace be widespread, may the seas be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, bind us all together. So with that in mind, I would like to welcome you all to our ocean cleanup webinar with Adam from Waiheke Dive and Snorkel. Just a reminder that this workshop is being recorded so you can revisit it and share it with your friends. A little bit about our organization. So Waiheke Resources Trust is a longstanding not-for-profit organization on Waiheke Island that is committed to supporting thriving environments and communities. Our projects, as you can see on the screen, and programs aim to actively restore and protect our environment and build capacity in the community through education and employment opportunities. We undertake all of our work through an understanding of the principles of kaitiakitanga. Toi tu te maraea tane, toi tu te maraea tangaroa, toi tu te iwi. As a commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, we acknowledge na iwi o te motu Arairoa, Waiheke Island, as mana whenua and therefore kaitiaki. And now a little bit about Seaweek, Kaupapa Moana. So this is New Zealand's annual national week celebrating the sea. The New Zealand Association for Environmental Education is a national nonprofit organization that promotes and supports lifelong learning and encourages behavior that leads to sustainability for Aotearoa, New Zealand. Seaweek was first held in Aotearoa in 1992, and more recently, starting in 2019, Sir Peter Blake Marine Education and Recreation Center has been at the helm managing and organizing Seaweek events in Auckland, in addition to overseeing national coordination. Tonight we have with us the lovely Adam from Waiheke Dive and Snorkel. Adam and Pippa set up a unique award-winning business, or as we call it, New Zealand's most fun little dive shop, offering awesome experiences to divers and snorkelers at all levels. On top of that, they have also been involved in amazing community conservation and regeneration actions, such as the Waiheke Marine Project, Kelp Gardeners, and cleanup dives. Recently removing a 1/4 ton of waste from under Matiatia Wharf, Adam and his team have exciting plans for the future and lots of information to share on how you can help keeping our Tikapa Moana clean. I will now hand it over to Adam so he can talk a little bit more about his inspiring work, and I will monitor the chat for any questions you may have. After the presentation, we'll try our best to answer to your questions and have a little korero about ocean cleanup. All yours, Adam, if you would like to share your screen.
Awesome. Kia ora, everybody, and thanks so much for the introduction there, Natalia. What I'm just going to do is share my screen with everybody as well. Give me a second. Cool, hopefully. There we go. So hopefully everyone can see my slideshow coming up. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone for calling in today, and also thank you to those who'll be listening to the recorded sessions as well. Today I'm going to chat a little bit about ocean cleanups, so specifically about what we do here on Waiheke, but also have a chat about, hey, ocean cleanups in general, how you guys can get involved, how you can motivate your kind of local communities, and see if we can get some more cleanups happening. So super fun. And just a very quick note to say thank you to the WRT and to Seaweek as well for the invitation to give a presentation this evening. So I thought probably better start off with a little bit about me before I start talking to you all evening. So my name's Adam, and as Natalia mentioned, I'm the co-owner of Waiheke Dive and Snorkel, surprisingly from the name, here on beautiful Waiheke Island. We're the first and only 100% conservation focused and no-take full service dive shop. So what that means is literally everything we do, it has that conservation focus, and we don't facilitate any kind of gathering at all from the ocean other than recognized projects that may come through the community or through science, etc. We have kind of become the home of regenerative diving here in New Zealand. So what we kind of mean by that is this whole idea around being able to get in the water and make things better than we find them, you know, so whether that's cleanup dives or survey projects or all kinds of cool bits and pieces. We also won, very fortunate and I'm grateful to receive the 2021 Qualmark Pure New Zealand Awards last year as well, which was a fantastic, amazing experience for us. We're Qualmark Gold rated. We have a Paddy Green Star Award as well, which is all kind of based around our conservation efforts. Crucially, and probably most interestingly for tonight's conversation, we've done over 50 cleanup dives here on Waiheke Island since we opened in December 7, 2017. And actually, the interesting fact is we did our very first cleanup dive on the island before we even started trading. So the very first thing we did was a cleanup dive before we did any other business or activities. So it's very much in our hearts. It's something we do all the time. So I really wanted to chat a little bit this evening about cleanup dives and the what, the why, and the how, basically. So yeah, we'll crack on. So what is a cleanup dive? Well, simply put, the whole idea around a cleanup dive is to get certified, qualified divers in the water to get things out of the water that shouldn't be there. So whether that's trash, whether that's discarded items, whether that's things that have sunk, etc. There is loads that needs to come out, right? So yep, let's get people in and do that. The beautiful thing about this is it lets divers, people who've managed to complete their training and put their time and effort into building these skills, well, it lets them put those skills and experiences to good use to help protect the moana, so we can get in the water, and it's a really good thing to do. Crucially, it can be as big or as small as you'd like as well, you know. So Natalia mentioned we had a big cleanup dive under Matiatia, one of the jetties, a few months ago, which I'll touch upon later. That was pretty substantial, and we managed to pull out quite a lot of trash. Whereas other times, you know, we might get in the water and it's a really chilled out, low-key thing where we simply tackle some issues around having monofilaments and discarded fishing line in the kelp. So it can be big or as small as you like. Crucially, and I think it's really important that we make this point right at the very beginning, cleanup dives are not just for divers. So yeah, sure, absolutely, we kind of emphasize and encourage divers to get in the water, to put those skills to use in the water itself. But actually the surface team is just as important as those cleanup divers. And I got a quick photo here. This one was taken from our Matiatia cleanup, as Natalia mentioned. And you can see our divers in the water doing their thing, but also crucially, you know, when we're bringing things up out of the water, we need our awesome surface support team to help us get them out again. So here we can see a couple of our surface team giving us a hand getting a discarded bike, which we managed to lift from the bottom of the seabed out and up in there. So in this particular case, we had divers in the water doing their thing, and they'd come back to the surface, and especially with those big bulky items, it was fantastic being able to hand them up to our surface team. Surface team is also extremely useful for general cleanup dives, you know. So when the divers are coming back and they're bringing out bags of trash or all those kind of bits and pieces, having people on the shore to hand that off to make it a little bit easier on those divers is absolutely critical. So please don't think that if you're not a certified diver, or if you want to arrange some cleanup dives of your own, please, you know, make sure that your non-diving friends can come and take part. It makes a really big difference. So why do we do these cleanup dives? Pretty simple, really. We do find that, unfortunately, a substantial amount of trash or waste does end up in the waterways. That's not a unique problem for us here in Waiheke. It's something we do see nationwide, particularly, as mentioned in the next point, excuse me, that we have drains and stormwater that feeds into the ocean, right? So if we have a situation where people drop trash in the streets, end up in those drains, bit of flooding, bit of rain, all that kind of bits and pieces ends up straight into the Moana. So that needs to be removed. Things like, particularly here on the island around real peak busy time, you know, we do end up with a bit more waste than we'd like from island visitors, but also crucially just from locals as well. You know, people are not always the best at controlling the waste they produce and where it ends up. So sadly, quite a bit of it does end up in the sea. We also do tend to remove quite a lot of discarded or lost fishing equipment. So particularly here on Waiheke, where we have that kind of rocky, kelpy environment, like we see throughout most of the Gulf, where that kelp makes it quite hard for rock fishermen to manage their lines. You end up with a lot of line getting tangled up in the kelp, eventually either gets snapped off or cut by our fishermen, which means it ends up being stuck in the sea. So again, we tend to remove quite a lot of monofilament as time goes on. The other thing we do find as well, as you probably saw from the last picture, is other large objects. So bicycles we've taken out, we've removed outboard motors, we've removed kayaks, all kinds of bits and pieces as time goes on. One of the really interesting things we've seen, particularly in the areas that we've been regularly diving, is, as you'd expect, those big items have now mostly been removed, and it kind of becomes small maintenance of items. So places like Enclosure Bay here on the island, where we do clean up dives quite regularly. In the early days, we were removing big stuff. There was, sunken bits of kayak, there was plasterboard, there was all kinds of unpleasant things that really we don't want to be seeing in the ocean. And nowadays, it's really come down to small bits of monofilament and sinkers and that kind of bits and pieces. So it's really good to see the progression and the change, and is quite a nice little motivator for the team as well, as you see things do start to improve. So as some examples of what we tend to see on these cleanup dives as we're pulling things up, here's some kind of things from our everyday cleanup dives. So here on the left, as mentioned, loads of monofilament, and you can see exactly how it's got really heavily caught up in the kelp. We do everything we can underwater to separate things like kelp and marine life from the trash and discarded elements, but sometimes it's just too challenging. It's just not possible. So here on the left picture, you would have seen that there's some kelp there that has been cut to allow us to remove the monofilament. And then you've got things like sinkers and fishing lines and some hooks and some bits and pieces there as well. Image on the right, lots of bottles. So bottles is something we find really commonly underwater, particularly in some of the kind of like corners of the island where, you know, perhaps a few people have been having a beer on the beach and have decided that for whatever reason into the water is the best place to put the beer bottles. So you do quite often find those kind of bottles hanging around as well. And this is something we do tend to find particularly around the bottom of mooring lines and mooring blocks as well, when perhaps people have moored up on their boats and same thing, had a bottle of wine or a beer or two, and those bottles end up underneath the boat rather than in any kind of trash system. Of course, we're super careful when we do remove, especially things like bottles, to make sure that they haven't become a habitat. So one thing you can find is inside those bottles is things can live, you know, and I think a good example of that is we did come across once where an octopus had made the bottle their home. So actually inside this bottle was an octopus sitting there. So very important to make sure that, you know, it's really important to do ocean cleanups and to get the trash out, but at the same time, when something has made that trash its habitat, it's a very fine balance between getting it out and making sure those animals are in good, happy condition as well. Here on the left is a kind of good example of what we generally see on regular cleanup dives. So here's a diver who's out. You can see kind of underneath the dive on the left is a little bag, and real simple mesh kind of catch bag style system. So he's having a look in the sand, seeing what we can find. Usually on the sandy areas, you end up with things like plastic bottle caps, all those kind of bits and pieces in that kind of area as well. Image on the right, sadly, as you can probably imagine, you do end up in a situation where you end up with bycatch. So here, this starfish has actually managed to unfortunately be hooked by this piece of fishing gear that is in there as well. So in these kind of situations, if the animal is alive and healthy, or at least, not necessarily healthy, but at least alive, we'll do everything we can to unhook them and put them back on the reef to give them the best chance we can. But sometimes you do come across animals in the water that have been deceased, where they've been entangled, and they'll come out with it. So always sad to see. reasonably regularly we do come across fish in the coastal areas as well that have hooks still attached to them. So more than a few times we've seen snapper and kingfish that have a reasonable size hook in place and perhaps trailing some line. And wherever possible underwater, we'll try and catch these fish and remove the entanglements. But again, it's not always possible. And here on the left, you can see a bunch of very happy people with a bunch of stuff. So photo on the left was from a little test dive we did in the Matiatia area. And as you can see, there's a lot of bottles and straps and ropes and bits and pieces. All these came out from around the kind of mooring areas in Matiatia. And on the right, you've got a group of divers who are about to head into the water. I guess the nice point here to kind of bring up is that actually, sure, we don't really want to have to be bringing trash out of the ocean. We'd much rather it wasn't there. But actually, it's a really good, feel-good activity to do. So it's a nice way to put those skills to good use, get in the water and make a very visible, positive difference to what's going on in there. Yeah, it's a really, really cool thing to get involved with. The other one, as Natalia mentioned recently, was the Matiatia cleanup we did in December. So we managed to, after quite a few years of negotiation, we got permission from Auckland Transport to close the second jetty in the Matiatia area for half a day and do a cleanup dive underneath it. We thought it was going to be bad underneath the jetties, and honestly, it was way worse than we expected. So because of the timing around December and the fact that the cleanup dive had to be midweek for the permits and the nature of COVID doing its thing at the time, we only really could actually get 3 divers safely in the water. So with 3 divers in the water and 4 support team on the surface. And yeah, in 90 minutes, they managed to remove 215 kilos of trash from just simply underneath that second jetty. There is plenty more. I think this is probably less than a quarter of what's actually underneath Jetty 2 that could do with coming out. A lot of stuff is under there. Super, super, super sad because it's a really important place on the island. You know, Matiatia has a really strong, important cultural history to the island, and it's the gateway. You know, it's where people arrive and depart. So it's where we welcome our guests and where we thank them for coming to the island. And to see it in such a state underwater is pretty harsh, to be honest. And there's all kinds of stuff. You know, the bikes that came out, we removed 2.5 bikes from this particular cleanup dive, which was one that was a reasonable number. And, you know, chairs, there's a couple of tires, a lot of matting as well. So one of the things that became quite clear from this particular cleanup dive was quite a lot of the building materials that have been used or perhaps were left over from works and repairs to the wharfs over the years have ended up in the water underneath it. And that's certainly some feedback that went back to Auckland Transport around, hey, actually, maybe we need to be, or maybe they need to be looking into some of the procedures and protocols in place for when works are being done on the wharfs. Makes a big difference. We are currently in the process of negotiating further access back under the jetty again. It is complicated, as you'd expect, being one of the only jetties that private boats and small commercial operators can load and unload from. But having seen some of this and some of the feedback from the team at Auckland Transport, they're super keen to get more of this out. Crucially as well, and I can share with you guys, we haven't made this public yet, but you guys can hear first, is we have an agreement in place with Auckland Transport as well, because they're going to be doing some works on the main jetty, hopefully within the next few months. And they'll be moving the ferry service onto the smaller jetty. And they've given us open, unlimited access to underneath the main jetty for the whole time they're doing work. So it's likely to be 3 or 4 weeks where we can get under that jetty and get absolutely everything out. So it'll be a case of very big organization to make that cleanup dive happen. So we'll make sure we let everyone know. We'll be keen to get as many divers in the water as possible, because if Jetty 2 is bad, I think Jetty 1 is going to be a lot worse. And yeah, here's a little picture of the overall area and overall removal from Pier 1, from Jetty number 2, what used to be called the old fuel dock, in that kind of area. So yeah, a lot of stuff came out. In terms of running cleanup dives, if you want to run them yourselves, it's way, way, way easier than you think. So we, as a Paddy Dive store, we run through the Project Aware, or as an organization now called Paddy Aware, and they have excellent resources to help you run cleanup dives. And I think the super important thing to point out is you don't have to be a dive shop to run a cleanup dive. So these resources are open to everybody to manage there as well. They have this thing called a Dive Against Debris toolkit, which basically gives you step-by-step instructions. It's very much a case of, you need to look into this, you need to think about this, you need to plan this, etc., 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 etc. Hints how to make sure it's nice and safe, all those things as well. So absolutely recommend that you download that. It's completely free. You can literally search for the Dive Against Debris toolkit on Google and it will come up. Then awesomely, they have a really detailed marine debris ID guide, which helps you work out what you found, because a piece of plastic is not just a piece of plastic, right? It's really good to be able to say, hey, look at this. Is it a bottle cap? Is this a wrapper, etc., etc., etc. So you can start to work out where this stuff is coming from. And they have an online app-based system where you can record that data. So you can log in. If you've got a phone or an iPad with you, great, fantastic. If not, you can do it on paper and literally record every single bit you've done. And yeah, you end up with a situation where you can sort through all that stuff. So here's a good example of that. Here on the left, it's just a general collection of things that came out with one of our cleanup dives one day. I've got a feeling this was actually a cleanup dive we did a Little O, which is a spot that the Waiheke Resources Trust does a lot of work on as well. And as you can see, quite a lot of stuff came out. It is interesting. We do see different trends of different things in different places. So Little O is really common, for example, for us to find food wrappers, packaging, all those kind of bits and pieces, just because it's a very popular tourist spot. Whereas further east, as we move towards Enclosure Bay, those kind of areas, you generally find more things like fishing equipment, etc., etc., etc. And you can see Jake here on the right looking extremely happy about the job of sorting through all of this into different types and different categories so that we can make sure we log it all accurately. Again, there's some pretty reasonable amounts of stuff that come out as a frying pan in one of those. Obviously, someone's managed to drop their frying pan off the back of the boat at some point, which is always useful. And then, so this is kind of an example of how they actually log the data. So this is the data logging sheet that the Dive Against Debris organization produces. And this, alongside that guide, literally lets you run through and tick everything and see what's going on. So it's super important to get as much detail as possible. The site locations, how many people in the water, how long they're in the water for, all those kind of bits and pieces. Because what the team at Project Aware does is they then log all of this data and they start to produce comparisons. So they have data all across the country around, hey, actually, what's likely to be found, what we're finding most of, what we're finding the least of. Are we finding lots of things per minute? All that kind of data becomes really, really, really useful for campaigning. And there's some very, very specific things in that overall tally, like, cigarette filters and light sticks and all that kind of bits and pieces that perhaps might seem very, very, very specific, but do come in various areas as well. Super useful. And then here is just an example of actually what that data looks like once you log onto the Project Aware website. So it's diveagainstdebris.org is where they publish all the data. So you can see that, for example, on here in Enclosure Bay, 535 individual pieces of trash have been removed, Little O been 167, etc., etc., etc. And this is a system where you can look globally. So you can look at global trends, you can look at just local trends, you can look at regional trends. And as you add your data into here, it just builds and builds and builds and builds. Really, really, really super useful. And then following on from that, it's super important if you're going to be running cleanup dives is to actually activate your local community. So for us, one of those real amazing key things has been the response from our local community and how keen people are to get involved. And that only comes from awareness. If people don't realize that, hey, look, there's this issue around marine trash that we need to be getting out of the coastline, well, then no one's going to do about it. So you need to be letting people know. Creating community around those actions is really important as well. So make it something fun. If you want, no one wants to be doing something they don't enjoy. So while it's something we wish we didn't have to be doing, if you can make a fun experience at the same time, well, great, fantastic. That works really well. Share your results. So for us, that means pictures. So for every time we do a cleanup dive, pictures of what comes out, pictures of our divers having done their thing, etc., onto social media. It ends up in the local papers, all that kind of bits and pieces, helps to build that community. So each time you do it, you have more and more and more and more people that are keen to come and get involved. And crucially, do it again. So one of the things I think that is a little bit misunderstood with cleanup dives is a lot of people think that you go and do a cleanup dive somewhere great and then the problem's solved and it's fixed. Well, actually, that's not what happens. You know, with every set of tides and every current and every storm, it changes that marine environment, and sadly, usually means more trash tends to appear. So it's really important to be repeating it in the same area. So you can look for the change, you can monitor those results, and crucially keep a space clean. So a good example for us, as I mentioned earlier, is that Enclosure Bay area, where we've been doing cleanup dives pretty much since before we opened up. So again, it was initially those really big, bulky things that would come out. As time's gone on, things that tend to find in the water have got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So it makes it more challenging to find those bits and pieces and remove them, but also it's really rewarding being able to go in the water. And every now and then, once or twice since we've opened up, we've had a cleanup dive where the participants haven't been able to find anything. And that's super fantastic. Like, it's, people are always a little bit despondent when they come and they're like, oh, we didn't find anything. But actually, when you think about it, that's probably the best thing you can do. If you can go for a cleanup dive in an area and not find any trash, well, that's fantastic. And it makes us all super, super, super happy. And I think for me, the one of my favorite things was, a real simple quote from one of our volunteers was that, you can do something good for the ocean while having some fun. So what could be better? So if we can engage with people and make things like cleanups and beach cleanups and ocean cleanups a really fun community event to get involved with, well, that's going to be awesome, right? So yeah, super happy. So a real short, quick presentation from me, but just a quick one to say thank you to everybody. I'm always happy to pass on advice, share our experiences, etc., etc., etc. So if anyone ever has any questions about the cleanup dives, about processes, how to make them work, etc., get in touch anytime. More than happy to chat. And I think with that one, I'm going to pass back to you, Natalia.
Great. Thank you so much. That was so awesome. I loved it. Really inspiring work, and well done to you and all your volunteers. So if anyone wants to join in and share their experiences, you're welcome to do so with your camera and your microphone, or if you would prefer just to use the chat, you can do that as well. We did get a question regarding a national diving litter database, which you spoke about. So that's really good. It's awesome to see that work being put out there and on the map, and to check around our communities. Is this happening as well in Tamaki Makaurau or other parts of New Zealand? And I didn't know I could check that on Waiheke, so it's really, really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Adam. Do we have any more questions from anyone? I was just checking before when you were talking about the fishing lines, and they take about 600 years to decompose. So when we think about it, and all the animals that can get entangled in them, it's really important for the fishermen as well to be involved in this kind of project. Yes, I go out fishing, but I could also come and help a cleanup dive. If I can't dive, I can help them sort the litter, because no one wants to do that. I saw how Jake was super excited to clean it up.
Exactly. And I think and I think sometimes if people go out for a fish, like your line gets tangled up and it breaks, and it happens, so it's an unfortunate side effect of just the activity, so having those things in place where we can actively remove them is really good. And I think there's definitely an opportunity there for collaboration between the fishing communities and diving communities about going, hey, actually, let's, if, as much as fishers don't always like to share their spots, but hey, if we knew where people tend to be fishing a lot, then we can certainly build cleanup dives around that kind of environment to make sure that it's as clean as possible.
Yes, for sure. During Beach Ambassadors, I got together with Karis from the Waiheke Marine Project and Jude, a local fisherman. He's quite young. He's still in high school, and we built some prototypes to collect fishing lines, and they got the approval from the local board to put them around 3 locations as a pilot. and hopefully that will encourage people to dispose of the lines properly. And he will collect them, and it's very, it's so amazing to see local youth getting involved with it, and like you said, having fun as well. We had a lot of fun trying to come up with ways to build the collection pods from PVC pipes. And yeah, such an interesting project, and everyone can get involved. I had a question here from Kathy. What species are the divers seeing in Enclosure Bay or Little Oniroa?
Yeah, sure, Kathy. So yeah, good question. So I guess the sad point is in Little O, we don't really see very much, as you can expect. So a combination of reasons. Part of that, to be fair, will probably be just the rarity in which we can get in at Little O. So as many people know, it has some issues around the water quality in that kind of area. So it's quite a narrow window when it's actually safe enough for our divers to go and get in the water. So yeah, in that Little O area, really, we don't see a huge amount. Enclosure Bay, all kinds. So it's a really special spot on the island, which I think a lot of locals are aware of, and just how special it is. But actually, we get quite a few things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see. So if we talk about little things first, that kind of Enclosure Bay to Fisherman's Rock, so through kind of Sandy Bay and Hekalua Bay area, is the region we still do have a population of seahorse. So we do have seahorses in that area still. And they are always hard to find, but they definitely hang around there as well. There's also pipefish, which if people haven't seen a pipefish before, they're kind of like a long, skinny seahorse, but they have quite a good, solid population in that kind of area. Then it's a good spot for nudibranch. So we see quite a few different species of nudibranch around there as well. In terms of fish, a lot of your classic kiwi reef fish, so a lot of snapper, porore, we have goatfish, we have lots of spotties, demoiselles, those kind of things. It's a good area for octopus as well. And then as you move further out, so we have that kind of outer reef area you can see in the distance, because it drops quite deep quite quickly, and has reasonably healthy kelp in that area, you do start to see some interesting and bigger stuff. So particularly recently, we've had some big schools of kingfish that have kind of been hanging around there for multiple days, those kind of bits and pieces too. And we do get reasonable recordings and data on bronzies being in that area as well from local spearos, but we haven't seen a bronzy on scuba out there yet, but one day hopefully.
Yeah, quite a bronzies around Matiatia, big population there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else with any questions? For the people who are not on Waiheke, do you have something in your local community to take care of our moana? And you're welcome to turn on your microphone if you'd like to have a little chat with us as well. Adam, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
I think the biggest thing just to touch upon is cleanup dives are far easier than a lot of people think. Like, I think, there's this idea that actually it's going to be a big logistical complication, et cetera, but it really isn't. It can be as big or as small as you like. We try to have this little philosophy that every cleanup dive is a cleanup dive. So if we're in the water and we see something that is there that shouldn't be there, well, it's coming out. And if you're a person is keen in the water, whether you're a scuba diver or a snorkeler or a free diver or any of these kind of things, then it's a really good excuse to activate some of your friends to go and get in the water, and just to have a look and to start that process. You may find there's things you can't physically recover because of the size, or you need specialist equipment. Fine, there's always people around, and I'm always happy to share some of those resources and contacts, etc. So yeah, I just would encourage people to get out there. Many hands make light work and all that.
Yeah. And when is your next cleanup dive?
Good question. I think our next one is in about 10 days, 2 weeks. I will check the diary while I'm looking. I should know this. The next one is a week Sunday. So
Okay.
yeah, 9 a.m. on the 20th of March is going to be our next cleanup dive. So I think we've got a couple signed up already. Yeah, if people are keen, awesome, come along. It'll be great to see you all and get you in the water.
Yeah. And do they need to bring their own equipment for a dive?
So one of the things we do with the cleanups is, because it's important, is we subsidize the activity. So there's a small booking charge, which then gets donated to Project Aware. And then any equipment that is needed is half price. So we keep it as low as we can. I wish we could afford to let people borrow gear for nothing, but sadly, in the current climate, things are always a challenge. But yeah, we make sure everything's half price for anyone that clean up dives, which is good.
That's great. Thank you. And I would like to offer to the people that are not from Waiheke, if you're ever interested in coming over to take part of one of the dives, just contact me. I'll send a follow-up email with my email address, and I can help you arrange ferry tickets at a lower price, or because we only have a few people here, I would be happy to give them away to you. So if you are planning on coming to Waiheke to help out, either in the water or on the surface, and just see the beautiful work that Adam's been doing, just contact me and we are happy to arrange that. Just reading the last comments before we finish up. So we have Summer saying that she's taking a geography paper at uni, focusing on the marine environment around Waiheke. So it was really great to hear that these cleanup dives are making a positive difference over there.
Awesome.
That's really good, Summer. And we also at Waiheke Resources Trust, we take on interns. A lot of them are doing their degrees in geography or environmental science at universities in Auckland. So if you're ever interested in doing an internship with us in the future, just, yeah, we would be happy to see you over here. All right, if we don't have any more questions, I would like to say thank you so much for everyone. I know this is a really tricky time to be able to join in, so I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And Adam, your expertise and all the work that you do as well. All that you do for Waiheke and for the kids. You're also involved with the Marine Education Initiative. And I heard that some of the kids snorkeling even saw an eagle ray, which they found really, really exciting. So yeah, it's a beautiful project with the schools on Waiheke Island. So if anyone has any questions, I will send you a follow-up email, like I said, with my contact, Adam's contact as well. And hopefully we can keep this conversation and this mahi going. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. You have a good evening. Ka kite.